Welcome back to this i24 News Evening Edition. This is the Daily Debate. In the year 1979, the Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement in Camp David changed the entire balance of power in the Middle East. During the Cold War, the Egyptian army had received arms and advice from the Soviet Union, but after the signing turned to the U.S. for military aid of around $1.7 billion per year. This week, Egypt signed a military deal of $1.8 billion with Russia, sponsored by the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. Is this another historic change in the balance of power in the region? And joining me tonight is independent Middle East analyst, intelligence analyst Avi Melamed. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming again. Pleasure. And Alex Selsky, CEO of the World Forum of Russian-Speaking Jewry and former Russian language media advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister. Good evening.
Good evening.
So can we say that it's a shift of balance in the Middle East?
I wouldn't go that far, but it's definitely reflecting some of the changes that happens mostly in the last couple of years, and the most important one is the fact that in the eyes of many people in the region, in the Arab world, the United States is declining, mostly in the context of what happens in Syria, the Iranian challenge and other things. I wouldn't say at this point that it stands for such a dramatic change, but it's clearly a very clear signal from a major player in the region, Egypt, and also Saudi Arabia, to the United States.
Russia and Egypt. What is Russia looking in Egypt after we found out what they're looking in Syria and what they're looking in Iran? What they're looking in Egypt?
Well, first of all, Russia again and again we see that is looking for regaining the power. And if it's not the historic change, it's definitely we see again and again the tendency of step by step regaining the power and regaining the political power and economical power. And don't forget the $2 billion is a very good deal. Maybe it's the biggest one since the fall of the Soviet Union. And here we have to admit that for Russia, the weapons industry is a very serious one. It's a very, very big number of jobs. It's an industry that was feeding millions of people during the Soviet Union, and it's was very shaky during the last 20 years. So for Russia, it's a very, very big sign, not only with Egypt, not only this deal, but sign to the whole world. We're back in the weapons market in a very big way. And yes, definitely, as the United States is pulling back, Russia, fills the room in almost every part.
Vacuum that is created, exactly, especially in the Middle East. I have to say that it sounds, for me, some kind of revenge that Saudi Arabia is doing with Russia and the United Emirates, because I think that Saudi Arabia was not satisfied with the deal with Iran. It was not satisfied with what is happening in Syria. So it's maybe we should do a deal with Russia, and in this way, we're taking revenge in the United States.
In international politics, you don't deal with revenges, but you deal with messages. And the message is quite clear. Look, the Saudis are clearly very unhappy with the American policy in many ways. By the way, there is a major issue as well that both the current Egyptian government and the Saudis are very not happy with in the context of the United States, and that is the whole issue of the Muslim Brotherhood. They are very not pleased with the way the administration was supporting, to a certain way, the Muslim Brotherhood. But there is something very important in that context. Many times in an international diplomacy, weapon agreements or agreements to supply weapons and so forth are sometimes only a diplomatic mechanism that basically signals or send out a message. It's not necessarily to say that this deal is going to be realized. There is a big gap between announcements and even signing an agreement and between actually doing it on the ground. There is still a big gap in that context, so we have to take it also into consideration. I would say at this point that we should look at this whole romance between Egypt and Russia, mostly in the context of the discontent of the Egyptians, the Saudis, and a signal to the American administration, which, by the way, I'm sure is aware of.
Are the Americans aware of this gaining of power that Russia is actually doing in the region?
I think everybody is aware, and I want to point here now on the timing. The timing, first of all, I definitely agree about the fact that the announcement doesn't mean the deal, but the timing of the announcement is on exactly falling on the Olympic Games in Sochi. So, the Russians come and say, guys, we're back, and we're back twice, and we're back again. So it's, they have a very, very good appetite, and it seems that the tendency will take them further.
I want to maybe give the Russians the benefit of the doubt, and I want to say maybe this is not only gaining power, but it's also trying to gain prestige. And maybe after signing a military, let's say, kind of deal, maybe they want to take part in regaining peace to the region and maybe take part in the peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, because it seems that it's very close.
Definitely maybe, but the peace is not the aim, not the goal. I think that the interests of Russia is not to gain peace for Israelis, but definitely to be more influential. And you're speaking about prestige. It's part of the deal, prestige and soft power, and then the economic power goes all together. It's one basket. I don't think that in this area yet the Palestinians and the Israelis and the United States and the European Union though are ready to to pull back, definitely to give Russia the leading place. But don't forget, Russia is part of the quartet.
Russia is not giving the leading place. It's not given the leading place. It's actually lately taking the leading place.
Yes, but
we saw what happened in Syria.
Yes, but yet we see that Russia is capable to take when the United States is capable to give. I don't see Kerry at this moment capable to give this point.
Maybe not Kerry, but maybe Barack Obama.
Well, first of all, he's supposed to visit Saudi Arabia soon, which is very interesting. I would be very much interested to be in that meeting between him and the king and to hear what is going on in that meeting. But talking about the Russians excel in maximizing conflictual situations. To a certain extent, the Russians are interested in a conflictual situation. It serves the Russian foreign policy to a certain extent. Now, whenever we talk about Russia in the context of foreign policy, we have to remember a couple of things. Russia is enormously interested in what's going on in Central Asia. Russia is enormously interested in what's going on with the whole issue of the huge gas reserves in that region. And Russia, in the end of the day, definitely is interested in stabilizing or restabilizing its position in the context of a global superpower, a position that it lost in the last couple of years. Yet the way there is still far, because we have to remember something very important in the context of Russia and the Arab world. There is a lot of anger today in the Arab world on Russia because of its destructive role in Syria.
Of course. So how does it go together?
I think that if we look on Russian international policy, we can see that together with tendencies, they know how to calculate their interests every day and maybe every hour. So I wouldn't go to predict now what exactly will happen. We saw people that tried to predict and what happened to all of them. But definitely we see the tendency. Egypt is a very, very big player. And definitely Russia will try, to gain this power, and I definitely agree that it goes together with many other interests. It's all combined. How exactly it will happen and what exactly will be the next step, let's see. We already heard, by the way, in other announcements on other deals of Russia and weapon deals with other countries in the Middle East. It still didn't happen, so let's see.
So we should not be worried. The United States should not be worried. The United States should continue the sit back and relax policy.
I'll tell you something. If you have to be worried in this region, you wouldn't live for one single day. You will die the next day of worries.
Definitely.
But when we're talking about the United States foreign policy in the context of Egypt, we have to remember a couple of things that are enormously important to the United States in the context of the connection with Egypt. One is the role of Egypt in the context of the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. The second thing is the role of Egypt fighting the challenge of radical Islam terror groups that are now rising in Sinai, operating in Sinai. The third thing is the role of Egypt as a factor that restrained Hamas and other radical Islam Palestinian organizations in the Gaza Strip. The fourth thing, which is enormously important, is the whole rising conflict over the use of the Nile water. There is something that is enormously important. There is a growing conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia. Somebody has to be very aware of that because this is a major issue. And the last thing in the context of Egypt, talking about the relationship with the United States, is the enormously important role of Egypt in the context of the north part of Africa, and mostly in the context of trying to re-stabilize the situation along what is known as the Sahara Belt in the northern part, that became also recently a hub for militant radical Islam, Al-Qaeda style emirates. These are all enormously important issues that in each and every one of them Egypt has and could play an enormously important role, and the American administration must be aware of that.
Yeah.
I just would like to say, from the Israeli perspective, that again and again we see that Israel, that we should know to see the whole picture, and the fact that the world is changing, and to be much more multifunctional and multidimensional, so to speak, toward Russia and toward China, the next biggest player, because I think with the instruments we had for the last 30, 40 years, we will not solve the problems as we want them to be solved.
So what should Israel understand right now from what is happening, from the shift, let's say, shift of power?
To develop much more relations with Russia at this point, definitely.
And it seems right now the situation between Israel and Russia is standing on a cold relationship?
No, I think it's good. I think it's good. It's good, but again, it doesn't mean it's never all good. Russia can be very, multidimensional. It can be, very cooperative in one thing and very not cooperative in another thing. But I think that Israel knows how to deal with Russia, and today we have, foreign minister who speaks Russian and understands, and I think that this is a very, very good advantage for us.
In foreign policy and international relationship, love, hate, anger are totally irrelevant. You have always to look for the best way to achieve your interest, to know how you play your cards. Israel have some very significant cards to play with, and the more important thing is that the major players recognize that fact. And when I'm talking about major players, I'm not talking only about the West or the United States.
Of course.
I'm talking about Russia, I'm talking about China, I'm talking about India. The recent two are the uprising new superpowers in the world.
So if we're looking at the current, let's say, deal, the current, maybe Israel should try to ask Russia for help and securing the border with Egypt at the southern border, about what is happening in the Sinai enclave?
Well, first of all, I definitely think and hope that part of this deal will help Israel to secure the border, and this will be the advantage, our advantage, toward this deal. So I think that after all, if Egypt, with this regime, speaking about this regime in Egypt, will have more power, it will, I think, be better for us. They will control Sinai, they will control the border. So I hope it will be better for our security.
Is it going to help the security of Israel?
Doing a deal with Russia, securing the Sinai border? To a certain extent, yes. But again, in the end of the day, there is something very important that we have to remember in that context. Egypt, mostly specifically, is very sensitive when it comes to Egypt's national pride. Egypt wouldn't like to take advices from anybody. And by the way, the Egyptians made it very clear in the last couple of days in different occasions. And mostly when it comes to the issue of securing their borders. I would suggest the Israeli government not to rush and jump in leading such an initiative, but to see how things will develop on the ground.
To wait and see, like we're saying. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this discussion. We're going out for a small break, 10 minutes break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back for a very interesting talk with Rabbi Michael Malkior. Don't go anywhere. 10 minutes break, and I'll be back.